Hi, this is Bill Gruel with Protein Industries Canada. So I'm just going to share my screen and I'll talk a little bit about what we've been up to at Protein Industries Canada in the last little while. So many of you are familiar with us as an organization, but I thought I would just start out with a little commentary on our vision and what we do. We really believe that Canada can be a global leader in plant protein. I'll talk about how we want to achieve and accomplish that today, and the work that we're doing to grow Canada's plant-based food, feed, and ingredient sector really truly helps address some of the challenges in the global food agri-system, such as food security, climate change, sustainability, and human health. Now, just to ground us all, I know you're all very familiar with the statistics around the crops that we grow in Western Canada, but I think just really speaks to the opportunity that is in front of us today to process more of the crops that we grow at scale here in Western Canada. Again, this is a group I don't need to spend a lot of time with on this slide, but just to ground us all, know that we're sitting on a very large reserve of high protein crops that are unique to places around the world. And that really presents the opportunity, which I'll dig into a little bit more throughout this slide presentation. We really feel at Protein Industries Canada that we are transforming our industry. With our partners, we're investing well over $300 million over 4 years, and I'll get into the metrics of that in a few seconds to see how we're doing against that original target. We really believe that we're creating connections and inspiring collaboration across the ag and food processing sectors. And we really think that we're doing business differently, trying to build on our strengths of innovation and really remove the barriers around the opportunities that we have to grow Canada's plant-based food sector. We are, of course, a member-based organization. We're very proud of the fact that we've got membership across Canada now. So not only a wide swath in terms of geography, but a really good saturation of the value chain as well. Companies representing ag manufacturing and ag technology. We've got commodity and industry associations, the finance and business sector, certainly a large cohort of what we would call ingredient and food processors and seed and commodity, and post-secondary institutions. One of the things we've realized over the first 3 years of our operations is how critical it is to try to make connections between companies that are new to Canada or new to the space that are interested in connecting with other organizations, be that research institutions or businesses that can help them take advantage of opportunities or solve business problems that they have. We spend a lot of time creating those connections and collaborations. So how are we doing to date? Yeah, we've been operating for about 2.5 years. And so 3 years in, we're kind of into year 4 of our initial 5-year mandate. Happy to report that we've got 34 active projects on the go, total investment portfolio of almost $360 million. Of Protein Industries Canada, we've invested 129 of our original 153. And we've been able to leverage $229 million from our partners across Canada into our projects. I think that really speaks to the optimism in the agriculture sector and how people are viewing plant-based foods as an opportunity for economic growth. On the bottom line here, some of the metrics that we're also pushing at, we've created 889 direct jobs with the 34 projects that we've got under management. We've involved over 50 academic and research institutions involved. That's universities, the college system, government labs, National Research Council, food centers, all factoring very prominently in the projects that we're supporting. On average, about 8 participants per project, and a metric that we're really proud of is that we've got 93 small and medium-sized enterprises working in Protein Industry Canada projects. I thought I would maybe just highlight some of the projects that we're working on that are really near and dear to us in Saskatchewan. First is a project by AGT and ULivet. Everybody's familiar with AGT, processor based here in Regina, looking at developing new and novel processing technologies around texturized pulse protein, but they're also in a collaborative R&D project with ULivet, which is a small and medium-sized enterprise based here in Saskatchewan Looking at the development of tempeh and tofu for the market, traditionally that would have been a market serviced by the soy industry. So this is really a nice, interesting project for us in Saskatchewan and Western Canada to think about how we can utilize the crops that we produce here into what is a very large market of the tofu and tempeh. The project in the middle, this is one of our digital projects that we're working on, led by Precision AI. This is really using imaging technology and artificial intelligence for the determination of crop pests, coupled with the direct application of pesticides. The overall thought process here is that we can reduce pesticide load by up to 95% in field and in crop. Great project that we've got going on there in a collaborative R&D with the Global Institute for Food Security using some of their imaging and sensor technologies. The third project here, a name that many of you will also recognize, Verdient Foods and Ingredion. This is really looking at improving the functionality of pulse-based ingredients and optimizing the dry fractionation facility at Vanscoy, Saskatchewan. I think what's interesting here is this is a collaborative R&D with OMD, One Meal a Day Foods, that gives us ready access to a very large market in the United States for the products that will be coming out of that R&D. I want to now just touch on a little bit of market research that we did over the course of the last 6 months. I started at Protein Industries Canada about 2.5 years ago. And, I think the biggest question I've always got is, what is the market opportunity and what can Canada achieve and accomplish? And so we set out to start answering that question with some work that we did with Ernst & Young late in 2020 and early in 2021. And so I'll maybe just hit on some of the highlights of that market research. I think it gives a really good sense of what the global opportunity is for plant-based foods and alternative meats. So first off, I'll just make mention of some statistics around the growth of the sector in the US. It's about a $5 billion market today in the US, plant-based foods, led by things like plant-based milk and other plant-based dairy, meats, and meal replacements. So again, today about a $5 billion market, but hold that number in your mind as I talk about where this sector is going to go out to 2035. Plant-based meat sales by store section. This just gives a sense of how plant-based meats are broken down in the US market. Frozen plant-based meats at about 66% of the market and refrigerated at about 33%. Very little shelf stable. It just gives you a sense of what companies are thinking about and creating in terms of product pipeline. And then the far right-hand side, the plant-based meat sales by product type. I think this is really interesting because it is a highly diverse market, not really owned by any one market category. So the largest being burgers, but then also sausages, patties, nuggets, ground meat. So really a diverse product portfolio being developed for plant-based meats in the US market. I now want to talk a little bit about what we think Canada can achieve in terms of the growth of the plant-based foods market. And I put this slide up very intentionally. Today, Canada is about 3.3% of the global food export market. And I want you to hold that number in your head as we work through the next little bit in this slide deck about what we think Canada can achieve in terms of plant-based foods. So what is the plant-based foods market? This is also work that we commissioned and did with Ernst & Young. We asked a very broad question at the start of the work that we were doing with EY. And we said, what is the size of the global plant-based foods market? And we really wanted to segment that by alternative meat, alternative dairy. There's alternative egg replacements. There's fortification for the baking industry. There is emerging white space, such as the alternative seafood market. So of course, lots of markets available, not a lot of data and information. And so we really centered on the size of the alternative meat market as a proxy for overall growth and what the potential is. And so I think you can see from the data here, the suggestion that this is going to be a large market is almost an understatement. So they ran two different scenarios, Ernst & Young, a base case and a bull case. The market would be anywhere from 100 to 180 billion dollars Canadian just for alternative meat. And when you start to think about the other markets I mentioned, that's alt dairy, eggs, seafood, fortification, all of these other markets, not to mention opportunities in aquaculture and companion animal food, I think pretty quickly we can make a case for a 250 to billion dollar market Canadian out to 2035. But I think what's really interesting for us is we started to ask the question, not only do we want to know what the value of the market is, but what that translates into in terms of crop volume. And this is where it gets really interesting for us, I think, in Saskatchewan. In order to service that $180 billion alternative meat market, just that market will require anywhere from 41 to 66 million metric tons of crop production. It's a staggering amount of crop because in Canada on an annual basis, we produce about 90 million metric tons. We process maybe 20 to 21 million metric tons between canola, pulses, wheat milling, and oats. So a lot of upside potential for us in terms of satisfying this growing global demand. And so when we think about the need for additional processing facilities, we shouldn't worry about the fact that we're going to overbuild the sector in the short term. I don't believe that's possible. I think we really need to think about how we increase processing capacity across the markets in Canada. I think what else is really interesting about this, and I didn't share some of the data on how Ernst & Young arrived at this, but look at the sources that are going to make up that global demand out to 2035. So just on the bull case over on the right-hand side of the slide rather. So soy is still going to factor in very prominently in the growth of the alternative meat market out to 2035, but peas, wheat, canola, oats, lentils, crops we're very familiar with, crops we grow at scale here in Western Canada, going to factor very prominently in the opportunity that is plant-based foods out into the future. An upside of 17 million metric tons of peas required to meet market demand in 2035. Just for comparative's sake, we produce 4 to 5 million metric tons of peas in Western Canada on an annual basis. Today, my best estimate is that we're processing about 550,000 metric tons. So again, tons of upside potential and tons of opportunity, lots of capital needed, but opportunities nonetheless. So then that leads me to what we think is the opportunity for Canada. And I would contend that by 2035, plant-based foods market will be worth at least $250 billion in Canada. Canada today, our best estimate is that it's about a $500 million market opportunity for us. So I think it gives you a sense of the scope and scale of the growth. But for us, I think that we can capture 10% of that global market. That's a $25 billion opportunity for Canada. And I asked you to hold a number in your head, which was 3.3%. That's where we are today in terms of the global food market. And so I believe that in Canada, we can certainly punch well above our weight in terms of our ability to take a sizable portion of the global plant-based foods market, well above where we are in terms of the overall market. And I'll talk a little bit about why that is. I think a really important step on the journey to 25 billion is that we need to increase processing capacity in Canada. I think we have to process another 6 to 7 million metric tons of crop production just to get the ingredients that we need to convert into food products to ladder up to that $25 billion. So that's no small ask, right? If we're processing rather on average about 20 million metric tons today, another 6 million metric tons is a significant amount of processing infrastructure that we would need to build out over the next 10 to 15 years to meet this opportunity and market demand. So how do I think we get there? I think there's really 3 steps that we need to think about. We certainly need to increase ingredient processing capacity, I think in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 million metric tons. That probably represents an upside opportunity of a couple of $1 billion worth of ingredients. I think the second area is we need to improve ingredient processing efficiency and value. We've got processing facilities that are operating today If we employ new technology and invest in innovation, we can increase the extraction rate of protein. Also think there's a lot of value in canola meal if we think differently about that. And we've got some really interesting market studies looking at canola protein for human food consumption and aquaculture diets. That will require processing changes, but I think there's tons of opportunity to increase the overall value of the crops that we already process here in Canada. And then the third area, and this is actually the biggest lift, I believe, is increased plant-based food manufacturing in Canada. If you think that number one and number two, on our march toward 25 billion, is maybe $7, $8, $9 billion. The rest of it has to come from this idea of increasing plant-based food manufacturing in Canada. I think we have the capacity to do that. We also have the raw ingredients, but we really need to keep pushing up the value chain. And so why do I think that we can do this in Canada? It really comes down to what I would call our value proposition. Again, I don't need to spend a lot of time with this group on it because you know it intimately well. I'll just touch on the fact that I think we can do this because we're sitting on agricultural land and strength in crop production. We've got very sustainable production. I talk to consumer packaged goods companies on an almost daily basis, and the conversation always winds its way to sustainability of ingredients and our carbon footprint. Canada's got a great reputation. We need to build upon that. Got great research capabilities in agri-food clusters. Saskatchewan is central to that in Canada. Food safety and quality, it's a tough one, right? Because we do need a modern regulatory system to support innovation in plant-based foods, but we also know that the regulatory system underpins a bit of our international brand reputation. So we do have to be cognizant of that as we think about regulatory modernization. And finally, market access, it's just a critical piece for us. 38 million people is not a lot of people. We have to think about export if we want to be successful. Fortunately, we have trade agreements with most industrialized nations. So where do we need to focus? I think it comes down to three relatively large buckets, but I would say a continued focus on innovation from seed genetics through to end-use products. We need products that meet kind of the criteria of taste, functionality, texture, and price parity. We really need to think about attracting significant capital investment to support homegrown companies and attract companies from FDI and foreign markets. It's a critical piece for us. When I talk about the processing infrastructure needed to process another 6 or 7 million metric tons of crop in Canada, that's a $10 to $12 billion requirement in terms of processing infrastructure. So not a small feat. And focus on adding the most value possible from commodity to ingredient and then ingredient to finished product. The lift as we move from commodity to ingredient is good, but we can't be satisfied stopping at ingredient because then we're just going to commoditize our ingredients. We really need to think about moving from ingredient to food product, and that economic lift is where I think most of the $25 billion will lie in terms of our march to $25 billion and 10% of the global plant-based foods market. So I thank you very much for entertaining me and listening to Protein Industries Canada's story. It's an exciting time for us in the plant-based food sector, very exciting time in agriculture, and please have a great rest of the conference.
I was laying on the ground and I couldn't move, just paralyzed. And then after a few seconds, feelings started coming back, and I looked up and I seen the power line, and then I knew what happened. The field we were working on, the road was flooded. So we were filling in a neighbor's grass field, and as we were unfolding the conveyor on the seed tender, it contacted an electrical line, and I was leaning against the tender and got shocked. The electricity somehow controls your muscles, and I was like, I know my arm was twisted in this weird position, and I was just like completely numb. So my first thought was, oh, I wonder how bad it is. So then I looked at my arms and had on my fingers, and then looked at my shoe, and there was actually smoke coming out of my shoe. I called my wife, and she came and picked me up. taking me to the hospital, she drove me. She said that was the worst smell she ever had. So now she says that anytime, she burns herself and you get that smell, she just remembers that day. My oldest daughter, who does a lot at harvest time and stuff, she's always on the two-way radio talking about how make sure you watch for the power lines. So she's very aware of them now too since the accident. I think if the outcome was different, I don't know if we would be farming. Always use caution and just be careful, because it seems like the more comfortable and used you are to doing something, the more careless you become.